Prevailing Gales, the project I'm going to talk about, extends that long-standing interest, thinking about the artist as a bridge between cultures. So many of you probably know the story of the cypress, but for those who don't, the exhibition approaches the theme of colliding cultural worlds from the perspective of an extraordinary historical event that took place in the waters around Tebejima in 1830. In 1829, the brig Cyprus was piratically seized by 16 convict mutineers in Research Bay, Van Diemen's Land. The 16 convicts who mutinied the Cyprus were reoffenders en route to Sarah Island penal colony. They sailed across the Pacific in search of freedom. After sailing via New Zealand, Chatham Islands and Tonga, Marshall Islands, 10 of the men reached Japanese waters, where they were repelled by samurai under Japan's isolationist policy. This encounter was recorded by 8 samurai officials and local fishermen. The translated manuscript I have focused on is the Hamaguchi Makita manuscript, which is visualized here. A samurai official with remarkable illustrations and very poetic illustrations of what he was perceiving of these barbarian convicts. So here's a map of their journey across the Pacific, and a more detailed map of their movement around the coast of Shikoku in Japan, where this encounter or this repulse occurred. I first heard about this history on the ABC Radio National on a program that was produced by Tim Stone and Aya Hatono. They interviewed Nick Russell, who's an historian and teacher, Hamish Maxwell Stewart, an academic, Tasmanian academic who researches convict history, and Warwick Hurst, who wrote the book, The Man Who Stole the Cypress. From that moment on, I started doing my research at the Australian Maritime Museum in Sydney, the State Library of New South Wales, and here at the Maritime of Tasmania, where I met Camille, and eventually in Tokushima in Japan. This is a really interesting map that's held in the Tokushima University Library that has the Cyprus mapped on the right side, and it maps other ships that are encroaching on Japan during the Edo period of 200 years that were coming from Korea, from China, and were repulsed. I think it was the Dutch were the only country that Japan were engaging with at that time. So, on to the manuscripts. The samurai manuscripts are extraordinary. They document the encounter with curiosity and detail through text and delicate imagery, offering a rare perspective on how Japanese observers saw these foreign intruders. They became a key visual and conceptual source for my work. So the Lady Nelson, which you may have seen at Constitutional Dock, is a very similar brig to that of the Cyprus. So I booked to sail on this ship with the volunteers that run the ship, and sailing on this ship just in the harbour gave me a sense of the scale, the confined space, the reliance on basic navigation. The convicts had a compass, a sextant, and a chip log, which is used for measuring speed as their navigational tools. And that became a kind of key inspiration, that object, for the rope work that I have in the exhibition. The crew had no maps of the Pacific, only skill, instinct, and wind, relying on navigational experience of William Swallow, who was the ringleader of the mutiny. I recommend it as a thing to do in Hobart. This is the chip log on the right side that measures the speed of boats. They throw it over the edge of the boat with a lead weight and time it with an egg timer, and that gives the knots of speed, and they use it they log the speed as a way of figuring out their direction and where they are in the water. Truly remarkable journey across the Pacific. So I'm going to discuss the materials I used. So as a starting point, this is my studio in Sydney. I started collecting ropes, and I collected them from shorelines, from museum skips, anywhere I could find them. And I used sort of bitumen to trace around the edges of the ropes, as well as other paints that I'd been inspired from reading in the manuscripts. So rigging rope at the time was made from a plant called sisal. These are some of the images. And the plant, it's native to Mexico, but it also grows in many countries like Indonesia, India, and it grows in northern Australia as well. These images I'm showing you are from Tanzania, which is a big sisal producing country. And so this became a material that I used as a base, as a ground for the paintings in the exhibition. As for the rope wall that I used in the exhibition. As for bitumen, that relates to tar. So there are these beautiful descriptions of the convicts maintaining the ship. They were painting tar onto the surfaces of the ship. And so the nearest thing I could get to tar was really bitumen, so I used that as a key material in the work. It's tactile, it's dark and physical, and it's almost like drawing with history itself. These objects, these plaster objects, are casts of the sisal plant. So I made about, 50 of these castoplasts, which are suspended in the work to kind of reference sounding or the depths of the ocean, which was another device used to navigate across those precarious islands of the Pacific. This is a detail of the bitumen and some of the ropes that I collected. So, on to Japan. I was very lucky to receive funding for this project, which allowed me to travel to Japan in 2024 and to do a residency actually on the island where this boat was anchored from. Before going to the island, I visited the Tokushima archive, where I viewed one of the original Makita Amaguchi manuscripts. So Takashi is on the right. He's an archivist and historian with a great interest in this history. It was an incredible experience to go there and meet some of the people who had translated the old Japanese language into contemporary Japanese language. These documents are rare records of a cross-cultural encounter during Japan's isolationist period. One of the other museums I visited was the Tokushima Castle Museum, which has since been burnt down, but it housed some paintings from that period, from the Awa province, and I was very inspired by these paintings, getting to see what the boats looked like and also how they were representing water. And it became part of my sort of brushwork, I guess, in my future visual language. And I started mimicking this as a kind of a dialogue between past and present. These works are inspired by maps and some of the things I was doing during my residency. The image on the right shows the bundling of rice, which was given to the samurai by the local people. The samurai were forbidden to give anything but water and firewood to the convicts, even though they had a plea for food. So quite secretly, the local people dropped off bundles of rice. There was a lot of compassion in this interaction. These are some of the objects that I was influenced and interested in, particularly indigo, which became a key part of my work. I actually used the indigo plant as a kind of paint. It was used in the manuscripts, however, it oxidised over time. The indigo industry flourished in Tokushima during the Edo period and was exported all over Japan. It was mixed with a white sand and was said to create the most beautiful indigo in the land. Tokushima's indigo is rooted in a kind of favourable geography alongside the Yoshima River, not so conducive to rice growing. So this blue is actually painted with Prussian blue. So Prussian blue was being introduced into Japan by the Dutch because it was a European and the first synthetic pigment to be developed in Europe. So you can see the mixture of Prussian blue and indigo used in these manuscripts. So after I'd visited the museums in Tokushima City, I visited the Awagami paper factory. For all the printmakers here, I'm sure you know about this factory. They supply paper to many art supply shops. And here I bought kozo paper, which is a kind of mulberry paper, which the watercolours I showed to you were drawn on. And I also bought some manuscripts that were very similar in form to the samurai manuscripts. And they became the basis for a work that I did called Mapping Winds. And I also explored using Google Translate to use the translation of the manuscripts. And they produced very bizarre kind of translations. I think the Japanese archivists were very horrified by me doing this. But I was just sort of curious about how they would translate these old Japanese texts. So on the left side, I use the Windy app as a sort of digital device to record the winds around Tebejima. Nick Russell, he's a surfer, and he uses that because there's a very good wave, which he said I wasn't meant to tell anyone about, but there's a very good wave off Tebejima that has attracted him to the island as a place to, I suppose he's become very devoted as a Tebejima resident. So these are the results of those wind recordings that I started with just doing watercolours, and I developed them into a series of cyanotypes. So back to Tebejima. Offshore from Tebejima, the Cyprus brig anchored for repairs. So you can see on the left slide where the boat actually anchored. On the island, there are about 150 traditional wooden houses. Many of them are built more than a century ago during the Meiji period, when Tebejima was a bustling fishing village with 900 residents. Today, most of the houses sit empty except for about 30, a sign of the ageing-induced population decline that is sapping life from Japan's rural towns and villages. There are about 37 permanent residents and others who have houses that come intermittently. So Nick Russell, on the left, he hosted my residency, and as I said, he's a really keen surfer and very committed to the survival of the island. He actually lives in Kobe most of the time, but he's increasingly developing and encouraging new enterprises on the island. So there is a dying fishing industry on the island, and a lot of gardening going on that island. We had a lot of sweet potatoes delivered every day and beautiful vegetables. This was the house that I went with my partner Alan. We stayed in this house, and I used the downstairs as my studio. These are some of the local residents that we encountered, and some were very shy and reserved, but there were a few that were very welcoming and very friendly. So Hama-san, she's quite a new resident on the island and is sort of renovating one of the houses. She's a retired pharmacist, and she was very involved in organising the Tebejima festival that I was part of. Karen-san, she's a permaculturalist and musician, and is known as the hippies. And often the hippies are talked about with disdain because they bring, I suppose, unwanted behaviours onto the island. A lot of these islands are very reliant on a supportive head of the village to encourage new people, but some are very resistant and nervous of change. But Nick and Chiyuki-san, they're both developing the Pirates Cafe, where we used to eat regularly. During my residency, based on the maps from the manuscript, I visited the locations where the samurai local fishermen interacted with the barbarians, including firing cannons at them. And they actually wanted the ship to leave peacefully because they didn't want an encounter with the British Navy. So the locations on the island were around the island, also on the coast, where we catch the ferry from to get onto the island. Each day of the 2-week residency, I collected stones and rubbish that was washed up on these locations, mapped by the samurai. In the studio, I traced around each object with different materials like indigo, Prussian blue watercolour, black ink. And my first paper that I used was pink packing paper that was given to me. And then I moved on to the Kozo paper that I'd bought at the Awagami paper factory. It was very hot during this residency. One of the villages on the mainland that was important and where the boat was first spotted was Hiwasa, which again was a castle town. Many of the castles have been removed from the coast of Japan, and this one has been removed too, but rebuilt. But it's where the cypress was first spotted by the samurai. And during the time I was there were a lot of autumn festivals because it was rice harvesting time. And it gave me a good sense of samurai flags that were being hoisted around the encounter, and also the structure on the right is a kind of enclosure that would be put up as a temporary structure for the samurai to be based in. During this festival, I did quite a lot of sound recordings, which became the basis for the sound work in the exhibition called What the Samurai Heard. So there's a lot of conch shells and drums and people chanting, and the sound piece was sort of layered with local folk songs and Celtic songs. So how do I get this going?
Just click.
Just click?
Yeah.
What do I click? Just click on it, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
On the left. Yeah.
That's pausing it.
Anyway, will we try and play that, or?
Is it from the exhibition?
Yeah.
Maybe you'll keep it as a surprise.
Okay, you'll get to hear this in the exhibition. So that doing the sound work sort of becomes quite an evocative part of the exhibition, where you can hear the sort of Celtic sounds, the local folk songs, and just the sort of sounds of the samurai when they're in attack mode. So one of the field trips I did was to go to Research Bay, and it was a beautiful place to go. I went on New Year's Day, and this is where the mutiny occurred, where the 16 convicts mutinied the ship, and they set sail to the Pacific. They were sort of heading for Tahiti. They didn't ever get to Tahiti, but that was what was in their minds. And they left on the 15th of August in 1829. So I walked around the foreshore of Research Bay and was looking for flotsam and jetsam, similar to what I was doing in Tebejima. There was very little actually washed up, but one of the, what I did find was tangled ropes that I eventually used as a cyanotype photogram. So cyanotypes are a 19th century photographic process, commonly known as blueprint. This process was originally used to copy architectural plans, astronomical drawings, and biological specimens. I use photogram techniques, placing objects and drawings on sensitised paper. They are exposed in sunlight, letting unpredictable environmental factors such as wind, clouds and water quality affect the outcome of the work. Once the image is washed, it oxidises and turns Prussian blue in colour. It's Prussian blue in colour depending on the length of the exposure. So these objects are photograms of the sisal plant. But to me, they sort of suggested the samurai boats, you know, like an aerial view of the samurai boats. And I enjoyed, you get the tonal quality on the right one by moving the object around. I also did photograms of drawings, of illustrations of the brig and sort of plan drawings of the samurai boats. This is a photogram of this extraordinary map that is in the Tokushima Library that was printed soon after the mutiny in about 1833, and it's based on a French map of the world, and you can see Australia up there on the left upside down. I love that they've inverted the globe. So last year, in this time of the year actually, I went to the Tebejima Arts Festival, which was very exciting to return back to the island in a different season. It was the end of winter and we had beautiful early spring weather. So I installed the works on paper in this Meiji period house that had since been restored. It was just up the road from my residency. And as you can see, there are no cars on the island. Everyone hoons around on bikes, or they've got lots of things on wheels that they move things with. And it was an incredible energy of young people, old people. There were about 2,000 visitors over this 10-day period. It was exciting to be able to share this history with local people, a shared history from my island of birth to theirs. So it was really exciting, and we had a translated history in front of the exhibition. The space where you can see the postcards and printed matter in a Japanese house is a kind of communal space, so anyone can go and sit on that if they like and chat, and it can be quite irritating for some of the people who are living in the house, having people have that choice to sit on their space. It caused a lot of media attention, so I was often being asked to be interviewed and filmed, and the president of Tokushima Prefecture on the right, he was a very charismatic character, married to a very famous actor, and he came along with his entourage and was fantastic the way he engaged with the exhibition. So yeah, it was I think because I was the only international artist in this quite small festival, it caused a lot of interest with the media. And it was a great opportunity to share this history. During the festival, I ran bookbinding workshops, and the books were actually based on the samurai manuscripts, and I would teach the basic of how to bind a book using red wool that had left over from another project, and sort of reference the convict jackets. And it was so much fun. I had a translator who worked with me, just hearing people's stories about the sea. And Some of them were picture stories, some of them were written stories. And some of them were quite sad stories of migration and a kind of migration, labour, loss and hope, because many Japanese have migrated with that promise of prosperity to Brazil, to North Korea, through the Pacific, and often it hasn't worked out that way. So there were some interesting and very moving stories from people visiting and living on the island. I met some great people on the island, one of whom is an ancestor of the samurai family that encountered the convicts, Romiko-san, and her grandparents used to make buckets on the island, and she has access to that original home and comes over there in the weekends with her partner, who's an artist, who was running mimeograph workshops during the festival. This is the head of the village on the right, a kind of shy man, but quite reluctant to have foreigners coming onto the island or new people. This is the cafe, the Pirates Tea House, that Nick and his partner have set up. And I see a lot of promotion on that on Instagram. They're trying to promote it as a guest house and restaurant. Here's some of the other installations that Japanese artists used in these abandoned houses. Some shell works that have been installed in the harbour and on the beach. So this probably is one of the most challenging aspects of my project, Prevailing Gales, and it was how to visualise the samurai and how they perceived and interacted with the convict barbarians. So the quotes I used in the paintings were from the Hamaguchi manuscript. I highlighted a selection of descriptions that expressed a deep curiosity as to what the Hamaguchi, the samurai official, was experiencing, what he saw and how they interacted. On the bitumen surface, I wrote the English translation and the Japanese text vertically. The texts on the paintings are partly erased and do not necessarily describe the image that you can see. These works combine image, text, and material, evoking both observation and imagination. Whoops! How do I get that? Hang on. Okay, so the image on the left is showing the wood and the water that was supplied to the samurai, and the hat is a description of what they were wearing. And it was described in such a poetic way as a kind of reeds from the mountains. So I kind of went through the translation of the text and found things that I found evocative in some way. The image on the left describes, is a description. They were very interested in the pointy noses of the barbarians and their curly red hair. But the text is something else. They were perceiving this twinkle of light in the distance. So I'm kind of juxtaposing different texts with different images. They were also curious about the tubular form of the sleeves of the convicts. And the patterns on the cuff of the. They also were curious. They described the sound of the barbarians talking as like birds twittering. So it was just really interesting the way the translations of these texts were describing what they're experiencing in such detail, and the gestures they were using to communicate, and their interpretation of this flag, which was on the boat. They called it was from Angeria, but they soon discovered, but they were very puzzled about where this boat had come from and what they were doing and whether they had bad intentions. So there was lots of speculation in these manuscripts that was interesting to read. So I'm moving on to the next. How am I going with time?
Another 5-10 minutes.
Okay, so one of the works, the rope installation, I titled Knots. So this work is a spatial intervention that evokes maritime systems of measurement, an entanglement of both a physical and conceptual condition, the notion of boundary and contact. I utilised the partition wall in the 19th century space to suggest a kind of border, the location of a cultural encounter. So this wall had been inserted into this space, I think to create a workshop, hadn't it?
Yes.
But I wanted to sort of transform it into a more sculptural object. And so this is how this is what I arrived at, inspired by the chip log and also the sounding devices that are used to measure the depths of the ocean. The sound is a really important part of this piece. So there's 2 speakers installed in the gallery. One is just above that wall that shows the encounter that happened on that kind of border of Japan, where these British convicts were looking for something, and how they were, that space where they've been negotiating a border and how you cross that border. So that was my thinking behind it, but I think people will read that in multiple ways. And I think that the sound is a kind of important aspect to that work. And the other sound track is installed underneath the display cabinet in the centre of the gallery, which is layers and layers of waves that I first recorded at Research Bay, but Gary Warner, who I worked with as a sound designer, he helped build the layering of these works, and we worked together. So you can see the knots are referencing the speed and the navigational devices that we used. And the rope is actually sisal rope that I bought new for this work. So moving on to the last part of this talk, I'm just going to call the body of work in the middle of the gallery in the display cabinets is called Mapping Wind. And wind became a central concept. It determined the fate of the mutineers. I conceptualised it as an historical force shaping the voyage. So using the Windy app, I utilised this digital device to translate the weather data into gestural marks. So every day from between August the 15th, 2025 and January the 17th, 2026, at 7 a.m. in the morning, I retraced the Cyprus journey across the Pacific Ocean through Cloudy Bay, the Chapman Islands, New Zealand, and Tahiti, the Friendly Island in Tonga, the Marshall Islands to Japan. This actual map is in the Maritime Museum collection. It's a really interesting map. It's in Japanese and it shows D'Entrecasteaux Channel, and it was found in New Guinea after World War II. So it was kind of a jumping off point, one of the first maps that I'd sort of started looking at with interest. So I've layered these wind cyanotypes over a series of maps that are both Japanese and English maps. These drawings are the watercolours I was doing are reproductions of the directional vortexes seen on my small screen, drawn into life as flickering brush strokes. Transforming the paintings into cyanotypes, I layered a selection of them onto Japanese and English maps of the Pacific. Sorry, just go back there. So, closing themes. This body of work brings together history and imagination, movement across oceans, cultural encounter and misunderstanding, material traces of survival, and it sort of asks, how do we see across cultures, and how can art carry these stories forward? So that's the conclusion of my talk. This is an article which I can talk briefly about because I've got time, but Tim Stone, who has a Churchill Fellowship, to delve deeper into this history. He organised a reunion with an ancestor, Julie Finlay, who's an ancestor of one of the surviving convicts, with a samurai ancestor. And they came together in Tokushima this year, and they will be they performed a puppet show that was developed in Tokushima that will be possibly later part of the Wooden Boats Festival in Hobart. So these sort of cultural bridges are being done by a whole team of us. You know, there's been a novel written, there's been an opera made, I think, which was part of the Small Boats Festival. And I kind of feel like I've become part of this team of artists and creative people who are in some way trying to interpret this history and build bridges and cultural understanding through the arts. So that's been a focus of my work and will continue to be so. So thank you, everybody. I don't know if we've got time for questions here, but we will have in the gallery, or if anyone, do we have a bit of time for any questions who can't come to the gallery?
5 minutes if there are some questions. Probably have a chat as well.
Yes, Sally.
What happened to the pirates? Like, what happened to them after Maritime? Did they get back to Tasmania, or they died?
There were 5 trialled in England. They were caught up with in Canton in Hong Kong, and they 2 of them were hung, and William Swallow, who was the ringleader, he came back to Australia and died at Port Arthur. And John Denham, he's the surviving, is Julie here, Julie Finlay? She's an ancestor of him. He came back to Tasmania, served his sentence and went on to live a life in Tasmania as an ex-convict. But there are also some unanswered questions, and I think that's what Tim Stone's trying to answer, like what happened to the 5 that left the ship in Tonga? You know, they may have joined whaling boats from America or sealing boats. There's a lot of unknown questions. And I think Tim's also trying to find the wreck, which is said to be in the around Hong Kong on one of the islands, because they can kind of map, they've got enough information now to actually find wrecks and their origins. So that's what happened. Yeah. Are there any other questions?
Do you know how much awareness of this story there was from the Japanese side? Like, when I saw that newspaper article, like, was nothing I'd ever heard of before here. And obviously this guy, was it Tim that was doing research?
Tim Stone, yeah.
In Japan. Like, how did he come across the story, do you know?
He came across it through Nick Russell, who he just had a kind of, he's not a professional historian, but he had an interest in history, and he was interested in the history of Tabajima, where he had his surfing house, and he was just delving into the archives and found these samurai manuals, and it's been a very significant discovery, because there was only speculation that this boat went to the shores of Japan, and now they know that they actually did. So these manuscripts had been buried in the archives. And so in terms of it being taken on by the Japanese, there would be some exposure, like there is here, of this history, because there's an historian, Takashi Tokuno, he's written about it, and the media have picked it up. And I know this reunion that recently happened was picked up by the media. So it would be coming into the Japanese psyche as much as it is here, I guess.
It's quite recent, isn't it?
Yeah, it's quite recent. And I think over time it will become much more known as a history. It's hard for me to gauge fully in Japan how it's been received, but it's getting more and more traction, I guess, or more and more exposure. And I know Nick tried to put it into the school curriculum of the island, but he didn't have any success with that, because it is a really important history. So, yeah. And it's been funded by DFAT, so it's been seen as a very significant kind of discovery. Are there any? Yeah.
not sure whether I might have missed something or not, but when you said that they took over the ship, what happened to I assume that the crew were...
The crew were put ashore,
Right.
and there were some convicts that chose not to go with these convicts, so they made that choice. And they eventually found their way back to Hobart and were rescued. So there were no actual deaths during this mutiny, because there were women on the boat, as well as the military, as well as a group of convicts. And I think the convicts that were on the boat, they ended up getting, you know, some sort of freedom from not participating in that mutiny. So there were benefits for them not to go with the mutineers. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
So what was the idea about going to Tahiti? Did that have something to do with mutiny on the Bounty?
No, it's a separate thing, but I think it was more, look, I think it was more like a dream to be away from the British, because Tahiti was colonised by French, so they were trying to escape the British. They didn't ever arrive at Tahiti, but I think it was William Swallow really wanted to get back to England, to his family. But I think that holding out that dream that they could be free from the horrors of Sarah Island, you'd take any sort of risk to be away from that, I think. But the winds stopped them landing at Tahiti. And I think when I was doing that research, that's where the title, which really stuck with me, Prevailing Winds, came into the work so heavily, because they were so kind of steered by the winds. And yeah, that's... Any other questions?
I just wanted to say how amazing that an island that has a population of what, 300 people or something?
37.
37 people has an art festival. That's amazing.
Yeah. I know, it's run by the local, Moogie is the town on the mainland where you catch the ferry across. It's like a 15-minute ferry ride. And like, there's lots of work being done in Japan. There's a lot of funding available now to try and promote these more regional areas, and it's often done through these small festivals. And like, I was amazed that 2,000 people came onto that island during that time. And they also bring people, residents from the mainland, you know, to do things like, there was all sorts of food, and there was permaculture. There's sort of a subculture living on that coast of people who like surfing and music, and the music part of that festival was amazing. I didn't show you any of the pictures, but it was really interesting to see this group of people that don't live on the island but participated in this festival through music and art. Yeah, so it was quite low key, but I think all these, and they were running on a shoestring budget, but they did, yeah, they'll have it every 2 years. And the organiser was run off his feet. And so many of these festivals, even the Echigo Samari Triennale and the Setouchi Triennale, I mean, they attract massive funding, and international artists are very high profile, but they're largely run by volunteers. And there's a big, that's where I met Miwa actually. Miwa over there, Miwa Warel. In 2005 I met Miwa at the Echigo Samari Triennale. As a volunteer, you were volunteering. Oh no, you were working as a translator. Yeah. So Miwa was paid actually, so probably not much. But that's been the joy for me working in Japan, is these ongoing relationships. And when I went back to Japan not last year but the year before, I went back to all the villages where I've worked, because you establish really significant relationships and they see you as an important person in their lives. So I've really valued the kind of relationships with the people in the village, as well as other artists that I've established over these last 20 years, and don't see it as a kind of fly in, fly out kind of experience. And a lot of the time the volunteers have made my work largely. You know, they, not with Tabajima so much, but with those other big triennales, I've been very reliant on them for translation, for creating the work, because it's been very craft-based, handmade kind of work. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
It's